Hello, welcome to Secure the Continent with me, Gbenga Aborowa, on News Central Television. This is the program where we bring you up to date with all the security happenings on the continent. But before we get into today's discussion, let's take a look at the top security headlines across Africa. France ends Operation Berhe in Sahel region. And in East Africa, Somalia Army allied militia kills 20 Al-Shabaab fighters in its latest offensive. And communal clashes leave 28 dead in north-central Nigeria. Finally, the United Nations says violent extremists exploit instability and conflict to intensify attacks across the continent. Don't go anywhere. I will be right back. Today on Secure the Continent, we will be looking at the latest peace agreement reached by the Ethiopian government and Tigray. After previous truces failed, there is cautious optimism about this latest deal, meant to end a 2-year conflict that has caused a humanitarian crisis. A previous 5-month ceasefire with the Ethiopian government and Tigrayan forces broke down in August, leading to fresh clashes. We have more details in this report.
After 2 years of fighting between brothers, the Ethiopian government and Tigrayans last week agreed to cease hostilities permanently. More than the actualization of a permanent ceasefire, the speed of this agreement has left many surprised. Head of African Union mediation team in Ethiopia and former Nigerian President Olusegun Obasanjo announced the decision of the agreement between warring parties to cede their swords, bury the hatchets, and put the guns aside.
As well as to systematic, orderly, smooth, and coordinated disarmament.
The restoration of law, order, services, and access to humanitarian supplies are expected to be in place. Also, according to the agreement, civilians must be protected. The deep rivalry between both forces, stemming from a fractured political history, tribal diversity, and ethnic differences, have been major issues fueling the conflict for 2 years. The war has led to the death of thousands of people, with hundreds of thousands fleeing to safety and many more others facing starvation. What was once a fight to finish in Ethiopia may have seen a logical solution. But the question that has failed to leave is, how was an agreement pulled in such a short time, and how long will it last?
Now, joining me live on Secure the Continent tonight, I have Dr. Adem Kassie Abebe. He's a Senior Advisor, Peace and Constitutional Building at the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance. He joins from The Hague in the Netherlands. I also have Seyoum Berhe, member, Tigray Diaspora Council, and also Dr. Pospisil, an associate professor, Center for Peace, Trust and Social Relations at the Coventry University. He joins in live from Edinburgh in Scotland. Gentlemen, a warm welcome to you, and thanks for joining me on the program.
Thank you.
Okay, before I go to my first question, I'd like us to take a listen to former Nigerian President Olusegun Obasanjo talking about this peace agreement that was just signed.
The two parties in the Ethiopian conflict have formally agreed to the cessation of hostilities, as well as to systematic, orderly, smooth, and coordinated disarmament.
Now, Dr. Abebe, how do you view this agreement, and were you expecting it? And do you think the ceasefire would last this time around?
No, thank you very much again for having me.
So yes, it was a surprise in terms of the speed with which the agreement was penned down. And at the same time, considering the violence, considering the suffering, and also the circumstance on the ground, it was not, although it was not inevitable, I think we could see it coming. And it's a tremendous achievement. It's easy to start war. It's easy to stop it even. Building peace is a whole different level of challenge. And so, at the moment, so far, it's almost 2 weeks since the signing of the agreement, things seem to be holding, but obviously transitioning from a state of war, from a state of suspicion, into a state of peace and a state of movement, free movement, including of humanitarian provisions, is more complicated. And so, yes, it's likely to stick. There are challenges. It's not going to be a walk in the park, but I expect the agreement to stick. I think both the TPLF and the federal government have the control. They have sufficient control to live by their words. And so I expect it to work. But it doesn't mean that it will be easy, nor as the agreement suggests, to move as fast as they suggest. But I expect the agreement to hold.
Thank you, Dr. Abebe. Seyoum, some optimism there from Dr. Abebe. What do you make of this ceasefire? It's not the first time that they've reached an agreement. There was a ceasefire that broke down in August. So what's different this time around?
Thank you. And Dr. Abebe, I would like to listen to him more because he's positive. I too am hopeful. But the fact that this came so fast, unexpectedly, tells me two things. One, something I knew. No one was going to come out victorious. I think they both realized. But the more important part is there must have been a very powerful push from certain angles around the world. I hope and I believe it is my own country, United States. My wish was they would have done that push early before we lost over 600,000 people. And the victims of this war are also truth and simple civility, as we have seen with so unbelievable destruction. But I'm hopeful, but there are some very difficult choices ahead of us, I think. Thank you.
Indeed. I would like to bring in Dr. Pospisil from Edinburgh. Just before the ceasefire, Ethiopian national troops and their Eritrean counterparts were gaining ground and really deep into Tigrayan territory. You would think they had the upper hand. What do you think led to this breakthrough that we witnessed in South Africa?
Well, it depends. I have to say I'm a bit more cautious regarding this agreement. Obviously, the Americans, the US had some pressure on the TPLF here and also like some help to bring them to South Africa to negotiate this. But I think the real gap here is the Eritrean army, which is in no whatever kind of way part of this agreement. So if this ceasefire is going to hold and even give way then to more substantial peace negotiations, which actually have not yet taken place, there has to be a solution that includes the Eritrean army, which was a substantial part of this conflict. And it's interesting to see, like, the Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy is not known as being a particularly compromising politician. So his motivations for engaging in these talks are kind of interesting and might probably be looked at from an angle within Ethiopia, probably linked to the current initiative of a national dialogue within the country. But here are also some open questions. What is actually behind his motivations here?
Yeah, but yeah, you did mention that Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed seems not to be the one that gives concessions, but immediately assumed office. He did win the Nobel Peace Prize for ending the conflict with Eritrea. And I'm glad you mentioned Eritrea in this agreement, because they're the biggest elephant in the room and they were missing from this. Don't you think all it takes is a phone call from Addis Ababa from Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed to Isaias Afwerki, and tell him, okay, we've settled our differences. You can stand back, you could withdraw, or it's not as simple as that?
I don't think it will be as simple. I mean, Isaias is also a politician who is around for very, very long. He predates Abiy also for very, very long. I mean, this agreement between Addis Ababa and Asmara, for which Abiy became then this Nobel Peace Prize, has several components, but it was basically an agreement that had tactical and also strategic reasons for both sides. I mean, Ethiopia at the moment is working on basically creating a navy, which is interesting. It seems that the alliance with Eritrea is one of their angles to get a better connection to the Red Sea. There is regional interest here at play. It's certainly not that easy that Abiy could tell the Eritreans what to do. It's not this kind of singular relationship.
Okay, thank you, Jan. Dr. Abebe, the TPLF made a lot of concessions. What's the general view amongst Tigrayans in the diaspora who have been advocates of peace and have been highlighting the war in the international media and press for the past 2 years? There seems to be a bit of disappointment among them. What's the general view?
Just quickly on the Eritrea issue, I think, yes, it's not going to be, it's not just going to be a phone call, but I suspect that the Ethiopian government, as a partner in this engagement, has been informing the Eritreans. And I also suspect that they have received sufficient guarantees to be able to withdraw. Now, as I said, there's still a report skirmish between Eritreans and TPLF fighters still. But I think, although it will be complicated, there will be lootings and more complications. I also expect them in the end to withdraw back to their borders, especially if the TPLF is disarmed as agreed, and also if the Ethiopian army is deployed on the border with Eritrea, which will then be a buffer against conflict between the two sides. Now, in terms of the concessions that the TPLF has made, yes, they have made concessions in the sense that they have now accepted the legitimate authority of the Ethiopian government, Abiy's government. But beyond that, it's not really a concession. They have essentially accepted the federal arrangement of the country. And so the bottom line is not really that each side has made concessions, but they both have accepted the constitutional framework as the starting point for the partnership between Tigray and Ethiopia, and also for the security arrangement. But in terms of concessions, I think the main one really for the TPLF is one, to accept that the elections it organized in 2020, that essentially were the last straw that led to the war, were not legitimate, and therefore now there will be a transitional government. It's likely that this is just symbolic, because I think the TPLF will still lead the transitional government, but that's an important concession. And of course, the agreement to disarm.
Exactly.
There is some, lack of clarification. I think the disarmament is not as extensive or as it may sound. What will happen likely is essentially a transformation of a large segment of the fighters, the irregular fighters at the moment, into regular security forces of the region. So they will not be TPLF fighters, but they will be transformed into federal police officers of Tigray region. And of course, they have an extensive number of fighters at the moment, and some of them will be demobilized and disarmed. But the core of the fighting force will likely be transformed into a police force. And so, yes, they have made concessions, but it's not as huge, as significant as a lot of people think. And this, I think, this misconception is part of the reason why some of the diaspora, in particular, have been extremely critical of the TPLF. But I think as they understand the key content of the deal, I think they will come to accept it.
I guess we also have to wait to see how it will be carried out, because the details and the execution of the ceasefire. Thank you, Dr. Abebe. Seyoum, this is not the first time a ceasefire will be signed between both parties. Is there enough trust between the two sides today that could make the ceasefire last? From what you've seen in the past 2 weeks, what's been the language, and have you seen things on the ground that encourage you to think that, you know what, this time is going to be for real? What makes it different from the ceasefire in March?
There is zero trust. Why do I say that? The Ethiopian government basically preferred or chose to negotiate with TPLF, an organization that they have designated as a terrorist organization, rather than negotiating with the government of Tigray. Because, again, as Dr. Abebe said, they did not want to accept the voting of 2.7 people in Tigray. Okay, you decided to negotiate with a terrorist organization, quote unquote. What are you? Number one. Number two, the Ethiopian government have lied about everything that we have heard so far, saying Eritrea is not in Tigray. And now, just a few hours ago, the representative of Ethiopian government saying the food is getting everywhere in Tigray. The services have already started. Go figure, the whole world is watching them lie. So with this kind of lie and saying we have not killed one person, when the whole world knows the rape and the killing of over 600,000 people is real.
Seyoum, I believe you're quoting a gentleman, a government official, that said 70% of the Tigray region is under ENDF control.
That too is a lie.
Would you use, I guess he was just expressing his opinion. It's not coming from the Prime Minister's office or senior government officials. So we can dismiss it and say maybe he got carried away and it doesn't
Absolutely,
reflect
sir,
the
we can,
stand.
except that the Prime Minister himself have lied more than that so far. So let me, with due respect to the Prime Minister, lies are part of his strategy. Now, as you said, trust. As in America, we say, we the people. The negotiation on paper is so confusing to begin with. I cannot even imagine the disarmament while Eritrean forces, I am from a minority group in the northern part of Tigray, where my family is still under Eritrea. As a diaspora person, will I ever accept the disarmament of TDF while Eritreans, not only the military, now they are bringing their population to loot everything in villages. So there are some very sick kind of behavior going on. I think if they wanted to have some trust, they would have started with food and basic services. And then we could negotiate. But right now, I personally do not believe Ethiopia wants peace. They are just forced by the powers to negotiate. So I'm not, it's going to stick only because the United States is watching. But how carefully are they watching? Not quiet. So it's not going to go the way the U.S. wants, but the U.S. will not let it fall apart as we know how that goes.
Thank you, Seyoum. I'm happy you mentioned food and aid, because this war's been going on for 2 years with devastating effect. Now, let's listen to what Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus had to say about the food and aid condition, the Director General of the World Health Organization.
I think since the signing, it's already a week. I think it's a week, exactly a week. It was last Wednesday when we had the presser, and nothing is moving in terms of food aid or medicines. And you can imagine that many people are dying from treatable diseases. Many people are dying from starvation. What we believe is, even in the middle of fighting, civilians need food, need medicine. It cannot be a condition. Especially after the ceasefire agreement, I was expecting that food and medicine would just flow immediately. That's not happening. A week is not short time to arrange, if there is a need, to arrange some things to make it happen. So, of course, we're glad peace is given a chance. Let's give a chance to peace. But we would also urge urge the immediate, delivery of food and medicine. Thank you.
Now, Dr. Pospisil, in Edinburgh, you heard the Director General of the World Health Organization there, Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus. He says a week after the ceasefire, where is the humanitarian response for the 6 million people in Tigray region in Ethiopia? Is aid coming in and are services beginning to be restored?
I mean, it's always difficult to say. We have no real independent information from the region. And what happened over the course of the last 2 years is essentially without precedence, I have to say, shutting off a region of a country in what happened to Tigray has not happened really after the end of the Cold War in that kind of dimension. So still information is lacking. It is clear now that the region was basically held off any kind of aid for the last months and years. So obviously things need to come in urgently. There is investigations going on that there was a strategic campaign even to use hunger as a weapon in the region.
And it's a war crime.
Pardon me?
I mean, using hunger as a weapon constitutes a war crime.
Yeah, I mean, this is the question here. The interesting thing is that there is at the UN level several investigations going on, and it will be in the end a political decision taken if this is called like that officially or not. From like what we have as information, it is clear that Ethiopia prevented any kind of aid to reach the region for a considerable amount of time. And that's without doubt. I think there is evidence for that. I think there is considerable ground to believe that hunger has been used as a weapon in this situation. There will be more investigations about this. Investigations are going on. And it will be in the end then a political decision taken, although there is reason to believe that the UN might not be willing to really take on the Abiy government as in the severity that the situation would request, actually.
Thank you, Jan. Now, Dr. Abebe, we did hear Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus there saying that you shouldn't have an agreement. It shouldn't be a condition to have a free flow of humanitarian aid and medicine. And this agreement came with several other conditions requiring implementation for lasting peace. So far, what's the situation with things on the ground? Have there been skirmishes? Is the ceasefire holding? And what's the agreement with flow of humanitarian aid into Tigray?
I think Jan is right. He is right in the sense that even if we take for granted what Redwan said, he's quite a high government official. He was the lead negotiator on the Ethiopian side. And even if we take what he said for granted, even if we believe him, it's still woefully inadequate. The needs are extreme in Tigray. Medicine, food. It is a region that has essentially been blocked. The blame, you can point fingers at different actors, but there is the reality that the region was blocked. And there was limited access to provisions, to medicine, and life-saving food. So even if we believe what Redwan said, it's still woefully inadequate, and things have to move fast. Now, I think so the difference really is that Tedros and a lot of other actors want things to move immediately, which is understandable considering the needs. Now, what I cannot be sure is how things actually work on the ground in terms of logistics and other things. Now, it's a week, and indeed, I think we should have seen significant improvement in terms of at least provision of humanitarian services, and we haven't seen that. But I expect that things can move faster, because I think this was, in a way, a preparation stage, and I hope and I expect that things would start moving faster now. In terms of the skirmish, the fighting between the Ethiopian army and the Tigrayan fighters has largely subsided. I haven't heard a lot of that. But what we hear now is direct confrontations between the Eritreans and the Tigrayans. This is likely to continue, partly because I think the Eritreans are going to be reluctant to withdraw before the Ethiopian army has been deployed on the side, because they might fear that they might be pursued, or they may have other intentions, as they have a lot of they have alliances with the Ethiopian government, but they also are pursuing their own objectives there. And so until they actually fully withdraw, we can expect skirmishes. But the humanitarian provisions, I think it has not improved significantly in the last week. But I expect that preparations, if there were any needed, should have been done so far, and things will start moving faster. And they must. Otherwise, I think everybody should start raising their voices.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Abebe. Now, Seyoum, the African Union-led negotiators were praised by the United Nations Secretary General and the United States Secretary of State. They've been getting lots of accolades for helping to silence the guns. What's your take on the role of the negotiators, especially African Union Special Envoy, former Nigerian President Olusegun Obasanjo, and his co-negotiator, immediate past President of Kenya, President Uhuru Kenyatta?
Well, the fact that they started to conduct dialogue is a great thing. Peace is needed by the Ethiopian people, the Tigrayans, the Eritreans, the whole Horn of Africa. The fact that they were able to bring them together have to be recognized. Now, I'm not quite sure I'm ready to congratulate African Union watching this genocide to go on for 2 years, and now I would actually thank the United States more than anybody for pushing this two groups to come together, they like it or not. I do want to mention one thing about the Eritrean involvement. They were invited by the Prime Minister. It is almost like United States asking Mexico to invade California. I mean, literally that. Yeah. He did it, and now the Eritreans and the Tigrayan forces, yes, they are fighting. In the region I was born in, included everywhere they are, there is a fight. Because right now the Eritreans are interested in two things. One, as Dr. Abebe mentioned, they are afraid they're going to be pursued. Number two, they want to take everything that they might have forgotten in Tigray. It's pure and simple, killing and looting. The Ethiopian government have absolutely no power to tell Eritrea to get out, because they have already, by themselves, said 80% of their military equipment has been given to Eritrean side.
So why didn't the negotiators in Pretoria, South Africa, factor in Eritrea and all those other militia groups that fought around alongside the Ethiopian National Defense Forces?
That's why I'm absolutely not ready to congratulate African Union or the honorable former president of Nigeria on this. They have watched Rwanda take place. And now, when you read the document, my background is conflict resolution. I read this document with due respect to all the great people who were trying. It really lacks consistency. It doesn't give timetable for, they actually put food and medicine as negotiable items. That alone tells you how much care and time was spent on this. What they have done, though, the disarmament have to be done within 30 days. They were really going fast on that. But they didn't put pressure on for food. Ethiopia to give money, to give food, I mean, and medicine, which is not Ethiopian, by the way. The international community is giving, the Ethiopian government does not want to give the food to Tigrayans. This is clear.
I'd like to pick up from where Seyoum left off, Dr. Abebe. He says, the devil is really in the details. Now, the question is, which is priority, lifting the Tigray siege or disarmament? Because in the peace agreement, it was explicitly spelled out that the TPLF should disarm in 30 days. And people are saying, look, hold on, we have a national government in Addis Ababa that invited a foreign force to commit crimes against its people, to fight and kill its people. And the TDF is the only form of defense we have. And like Seyoum said, you didn't see that sort of urgency or timeline for the resumption of influx of food and medicines into Ethiopia's Tigray region. So what do you make of this situation, this catch-22 situation, Dr. Abebe?
Thank you. I think just quickly on the African Union, I think, I am one of the biggest critics of the African Union, partly because, I want it to be better. It can be better, and I think Seyoum also wants that. At the same time, in this particular context, if the African Union was too aggressive, imagine this particular possibility. Would it have been allowed to lead the peace process that ultimately led to the end of it? And so as a potential mediator, as the principal actor, continental actor, it has to be cautious. And I think it was right in being cautious and pushing the parts in discreet ways towards the negotiating table. And if they had alienated the Ethiopian government, it would have been extremely unlikely for the peace to return. And yes, the Americans have the wherewithal, they have the economic resources to pressure the Ethiopian government, but I think without the legitimacy, without the gravitas of the African Union, this peace would not have come in. And I think if they had been too aggressive at the beginning, it would have been more complicated. Now, in terms of sequencing, and I think you're right, the deal is quite detailed, but it doesn't mention any deadlines, any timelines for the resumption for the opening up of humanitarian provisions and also the resumption of services. Now, if you want to understand it in a positive way, it's in a sense saying that there is no timeline for this; it has to start immediately. But they could have been very explicit about that. But otherwise, the agreement does not outline a sequence, right? If you look at
they were explicit about disarming the TPLF.
That's right. So I was coming to that. And so they could have been more explicit about the question of humanitarian provisions and resumption of service, but they weren't. And I think that is obviously an important point to raise, and that has to be addressed as implementation starts. But in principle, there is no sequencing, right? So there's nothing which says you have to do A before B happens. But there are two factors that are extremely related, and that is the withdrawal of Eritrea and disarmament. And until at least the Ethiopian army finds a way to take charge of the border areas, essentially standing between the Tigrayan fighters and the Eritreans, I would be very, very hesitant, that I think the Tigrayans would also be reluctant to follow through on their promise to disarm. And so in a way, I think the withdrawal of Eritrea would have to be prioritized and come first. But the question of humanitarian provisions and service, I think that shouldn't even be in the question. I believe work has started. It's not moving as fast as things are moving. And I'm sure that the Ethiopian government is not being completely honest in terms of what is actually happening on the ground. And so there has to be more pressure. And I think the Ethiopian government must also come up front and provide updates in terms of what exactly is happening, what is blocking, if things are being blocked, still what is blocking it, what they are doing to avoid those obstacles and all of that. And so the burden now is purely 100% on the Ethiopian government to show that it's doing everything it can to accelerate the provision of humanitarian provisions and also the resumption of services. And so the burden, every life that is lost because of continued obstacles to humanitarian access and basic services, I think now is it's on the hands of the Ethiopian government.
Thank you, Dr. Abebe. Now, Dr. Abebe did raise some pertinent issues and concerns that will be raised during the implementation stage. As against other peace deals that we've had in this conflict, the one that broke down in August, a committee chaired by the African Union will be formed to monitor and verify implementation of the agreement. How much of a difference will this make in preventing a resumption of hostilities?
I mean, this is a good question. I mean, we have seen definitely in terms of the mediation now a new situation in that we have now these 3 mediators being active. I think the real interesting figure in this was former Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta, who has himself business interests in Ethiopia. Kenya is on the verge of investing quite a bit. Safaricom has invested in the telecom sector. Pardon me?
With the Ethiopian telecoms, yes.
Yeah. And also like the banking sector might open up at some point. So Kenya has vital interests in, apart even from the immediate security situation and Ethiopia being an unstable neighboring country, there is substantial interest in this thing moving forward. So perhaps even at this kind of level, talking to the Ethiopian Prime Minister about like actually what is at stake might change something. But as we've heard before, the pressure is indeed on the Ethiopian government. And Prime Minister Abiy has obviously a big plan in his head of how he wants to change the Ethiopia governance framework. And this runs diametrically across and against what the TPLF is standing for and what the TPLF, when basically they were running the whole country, established as a system of ethnic federalism. So there is the political problem behind this conflict is far from being solved, has not been addressed by this agreement, and must be like subject to whatever comes in future like agreements, negotiation stages, and probably at this national dialogue. Though I have not yet heard if the TPLF would be willing to participate in what the Ethiopian government is proposing and at the moment like basically establishing as a national dialogue in the country. Without a solution on this big question of what happens to ethnic federalism in the country, this conflict is not going to be over, that's for sure.
Quite interesting times in Ethiopia. Now, Seyoum, when you have a situation like this, the bloody war has been happening for 2 years, and you finally have a truce, you expect both parties to start making some confidence building measures to build trust amongst them. And, so my question to you is this: will the Ethiopian government allow the international press to go in and monitor what is happening? And now that they've called a truce, this should really help with confidence building measures. Don't you think so?
Absolutely. I think the truth, as I said earlier, is the victim of this war, one of the victims. Nobody knows except those people who are there and have been the victims what is really happening in Tigray. There was a reason why he shut the system and he would not allow any media to go into Tigray. Now is the time. The first confidence building would be to allow medicine and food immediately, because I don't think it would be easy to find a person in Tigray who have any trust in Abiy and his government. Well, you don't trust people who rape you, who kill you, who destroy your property. So now, it would be great to start with food and medicine immediately, without hesitation, without argument. And then, let the truth come out, because I didn't also see any accountability in the document, nothing direct. So 500, 600,000 killed, we can't even find who killed them and what is the consequence of murdering innocent people. So yes, let's build, look, we need peace, okay? Abiy or otherwise, even Abiy. But I think we need to have accountability for the murder that took place in Tigray, untold stories. The Eritrean issue is critical. They need to get the heck out of there immediately and be accountable for everything they have done. And Ethiopia, not just Tigray, have basically bankrupted by Eritrea already. So we have a long way. And I do want to touch one more thing.
Go ahead.
This concession issue, I think Abebe was right. The Tigray government from the beginning said, we got to go abide by constitution. They have argued for that. We like it or not, they got that. I think concession were for people like me in the diaspora. Our notion, our dream was not just peacefully living with Ethiopia. Let's be very honest. But the Tigray government did ask for constitution, did ask for accountability, and the constitution is where they want, but the disarmament, even though it looks that there was concession, it simply cannot be, because Eritrean forces are still killing us in every part of Tigray that they are controlling. So the concession is not as big as we in the diaspora, I included, by the way, and I am speaking from personal, as I said that to you. I'm not representing the council. This is Seyoum, an Arab minority guy who have lost everything because of Eritrean military. Thank you.
Thank you, Seyoum. Now, Dr. Abebe, Seyoum raised a very important point on accountability, and it was missing in the agreement. Will there be justice for the crimes? And the United Nations has actually documented crimes committed by both sides in the conflict. Now, will there be justice for the crimes that happened during this war? Does signing a truce means that, you know, all sins have been forgiven?
Well, again, my apologies, I'm always going back, but I think Seyoum is right. I think that one of the biggest concessions that the diaspora thinks that the TPLF has made is that it has abandoned the right to a referendum, but that's not accurate. You know, the constitution provides for mechanisms for cessation if that's the choice of the people of Tigray, but there must first be a legitimate government in Tigray, a government that is acceptable to the federal government. And so even in that regard, there's no concession. If Tigrayans ultimately want to pursue a life outside of Ethiopia, they still have the framework. But I think, despite the brutalities, despite not just 2 years, you know, but decades of conflict, if there is the will, there is definitely a way to bring the society back and to mend relations. Now, in terms of accountability, well, so technically it's not missing. But you know, a brutal war like this implicates the highest military, the highest political officers on all sides. You know, whatever we want to call it, this war has been extremely brutal. We've seen the worst on all sides. Already 5-6 days into the war, there was a massacre in Maikadra. And of course, the Northern Command, itself, the way it was attacked was extremely brutal as well. And then after that, essentially, the Ethiopian government, fighters from the Amhara region, and of course the Eritreans have been sometimes recorded on cameras, committed extremely violent crimes. Now, the mechanism, the justice and accountability mechanism that the deal anticipates would be led by the federal government. So my sense, also partly because, as I said, that both sides, the military and the political leaders on all sides, would likely be implicated in a war like this. The sense of justice, the way we understand justice, I think, would be more towards truth-telling, towards forgiveness, towards reconciliation, than in the sense of punishment, in the sense of, you know, in the European sense of justice,
yes, punitive
as
justice, yes.
Yeah, and so the way justice would be understood and given effect would be different. But I suspect that there will be a proper reconciliation process, and it has to happen, and one that is focused on victims. You know, allowing victims to speak their experiences, and also as much as possible to compensate them to the loss of their loved ones, to the sufferings, the violence and the rape. And all of that happened. And so, yes, there will be a form of justice, but it's very unlikely to be in the European sense of retributive justice. But it's unavoidable. And as Jan said as well, you know, there are certain things that concern the Ethiopian government and the Tigrayans, but most of the issues, most of the political issues actually affect the entire country and therefore are critical to be discussed in a platform that brings all Ethiopian stakeholders together. And that is what the national dialogue is supposed to do. And I think, and I hope the peace will hold. If it holds, I believe the TPLF will also be part of the conversations to try and create an understanding of Ethiopia's past, but also the political future of the country, the institutional framework it should have, and then the kind of society that the country will build.
Thank you, Dr. Abebe. I'll bring in Jan from Edinburgh to have the last say here. And if you can, in less than a minute, I would appreciate what's the next step, what happens next, and the million-dollar question, will this truce hold this time around? I know you did talk about some underlying issues that have not been addressed.
Well, let's see. We went through this, as you have said, several times. I think the chances here are better now in terms of the context. The negotiations were very quick this time around. I think it will, like, if this truce is going to hold or not, will depend very much on two things. First, are there ongoing provocations from either of the sides? I think it will be unrealistic that TPLF completely disarms. This is not what they're going to do. So there might be a need on the Ethiopian side to look at this more pragmatically. There is the need also that the Eritreans indeed step back and remain within their borders. If this is going to happen, we have at least, like in terms of the trigger points, a chance that this holds.
Okay,
but as said, like secondly, there is also like the big political questions. So, and this concerns, as we've heard, like other parts of the country as well, Oromo, other parts are as unhappy as well. I think in the end, there will be the need for Prime Minister Abiy to be a bit more careful, let's put it like that, in pursuing his political agenda in the country, and taking more into account what several parts of the country think of they might lose in another, like if the governance framework
should be more accommodating. Thank you very much to all my esteemed guests tonight. Dr. Adem Kassie Abebe, he joined in from The Hague in the Netherlands, Seyoum Berhe, and also Dr. Jan Pospisil. I do appreciate your insights and contribution to the program. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much again for having us.
Thank you.
Now, it's hard to imagine the parties reaching a political settlement if they do not put very significant effort towards overcoming the myriad and sometimes overlapping challenges the conflict has created. To advance further towards peace, the federal and Tigrayan governments need to translate their small recent positive steps into a painful compromise, while Ethiopia's external partners must give the belligerents incentives to choose the path to peace. Thank you very much for being a part of Secure the Continent today. Remember to stay safe. I'll be with you same time next week on Secure the Continent. I'm Gbenga Aborowa. Thanks for watching.